Hey guys, thanks for clicking on this video. I'm Deco. Today we're going to be talking about iostream, which is a header library for input and output in C++. So this will give us the power to display text to the console and also to input text to the console so we can make our program interactive. Now, if you've been following me the past few lessons, we've already used essentially all of these objects we're going to talk about. So we're going to go into more depth with them today. The lesson that we're following, again, is from learncpp.com. If you haven't read the lesson yet, go over there, turn off your ad blocker, show them some love, and then return here and we'll get started. So go ahead and do that and I'll turn my display. So here we go. Introduction to iostream. Now I mentioned that iostream is actually a header file that you can include. We're already including it in this program. So what this does is it takes this file that has these objects right here, cout, which we've used. It's in the std namespace. We'll talk about namespaces later. Cn we used, and then there's this new one, end, and then this is a L, such as line. But anyways, what this directive does is basically copies and pastes this file on top of all of our code. This gives us access to these objects right here. Okay, so what is the input-output library in C++? It just deals with basic input and output. There's a lot more functionality that comes with this library than we'll cover today, so we're just covering basics. So we're just covering the things that you'll use on a day-to-day basis. So we've already included iostream, and we'll start with std cout. So cout is a predefined variable within this library, and so that means you don't have to define it yourself. It's already prepackaged, ready to go. Now cout stands for character output. So yeah, we've already used it in the Hello World program in a previous lesson, and also in this pH calculator program that we've been working with. So here is a simple cout usage, and essentially this string will be printed directly to the console. And we'll learn that this actually is buffered, and we'll learn about the implications of that in just a bit. So in this program, we've included iostream, and then we come across this new operator, which is a insertion operator. So the arrows are pointing to the left, and you can kind of think of this as this is the data that we have in our program that we're trying to push out of our program so the user or programmer can see this on the screen. So you can think of the arrows as like directional arrows in a way. And this is called the insertion operator. So it's important to note that cout can also print numbers such as here below. We've printed a pH, which is a double. And remember, a double is a decimal point number. Yeah, and this also shows that we can print variables. Okay, moving on. So we can print multiple lines of code using just one cout object if we use multiple insertion operators. So they give you an example here. I won't type this one out because I think it's pretty straightforward. But first, this will be inserted into the buffer, because remember this is buffered, and then this will follow. So when this prints, it'll just print hello world. All right, let's see. So you can use a combination or mixture, or we used it here, applesauce pH, and we have the variable pH. And then here comes a new object that we haven't used. This is std endl. The L stands for line, so end line. You might guess what this object helps us do. It helps us end the line and move to the next line in the console. If you didn't use this, we would essentially have, if you had two std couts sequentially, this would print, and then look here, we don't have a space between these two statements. And there's no space between hi and no space between my name is Alex, which is hard to read. So we might have wanted to put this statement on a new line. And one way to do that is to use this std endl. So let's see if they have an example here. And here we go. So to use this, you just put another insertion operator, and then you end this statement with std endl, and that will move the cursor to the next line. And you can see it here with this example. Now it's much easier to read. However, they have this tip here. std endl might not really be necessary for you to actually use. It's good to know just in case you run into it, of course, if another programmer used it. But it's not as efficient because it will flush the buffer that's associated with cout, which if you have multiple of these cout objects that are triggering in a row, you're flushing that buffer multiple times, which can be quite inefficient. But it is best practice to output a new line whenever a line of output is completed. So we'll actually show you another way later on in this lesson that will give you a new line without using this std endl. So keep that in mind for now. Okay, so I mentioned before that cout is buffered. So what does that really mean? They use a roller coaster analogy here, so you can read through that, but I'll give you my own analogy. So let's say you go to the grocery store for Christmas. You're buying a bunch of Christmas presents. How absurd would it be for you to buy one gift at a time, and every time you grab an item that you want to buy, you go to the cash register way up into the front of the store and bought that item, and then you would have to head back to the toys aisle or whatever kind of presents you're buying and retrieve another present and then go back to the cashier and then back and forth and back and forth. This isn't as efficient. Now another way to use it, another way to do this is to use a buffered approach. So you can instead grab a shopping cart, collect all the presents you wish to buy, and then when that shopping cart is full or you're ready to leave the store, you can go ahead and flush that shopping cart. So flush as in go to the cashier and check out. That's essentially how a buffer works, and that's how the cout buffer works. So it's more efficient to use this buffer, so we're not calling flush every single time. So typically not all the data is sent to the console immediately, and instead you get in line. And here's another analogy with using a toilet. And this is important to consider. Sometimes when your program crashes and you don't see output to your console that you expected, you may think to yourself that potentially the buffer didn't flush before the program crashed, and that data was just lost before it reached the console. The opposite of buffered output is unbuffered output, of course. With unbuffered output, each individual output request is sent directly to the output device. So that's what we talked about with getting a present and going to the cashier. That's just very inefficient in most cases. Now we'll talk about a new way to start a new line in C++. And that's with using this character. Note that this is a /. You don't want to use a backslash because that will potentially give you undefined behavior, which we've talked about before. We'll talk about more in depth later. All right. And essentially why this is favored is because this new line character doesn't cause flushing of this standard cout here. So if we do, oh, we have it right here. So this new line character, and it's called a character, but it has two symbols. But anyways, it's not causing this to flush. This actually, I forgot to mention, cout, it will flush when it needs to flush. But most of the time, you don't need to manually flush it. It will automatically flush when it's ready to flush. All right. Yep, so we're seeing usage of that new line character. And note, you can also use it, so I used it in its separate quotations, but you can also use it if you needed a new line and you wanted it to be a little cleaner. You could also use it within the same string. And we'll talk more about this new line character again in a future lesson. Yeah, and what this is saying is essentially it's preferred over the end line from the standard library. And here we go. Best practice is to use this new line character. And make sure you don't use a backslash. All right, so we use this for the past few lessons, stdcin right here. And as you may guess, this actually stands for character in. So we're pushing characters into our program from the console. This allows our applications to become adaptive and interactive. Now, note here, before we use this operator, which is the insertion operator, now we're using the extraction operator. So it's going to extract the characters from the console and plug it into your program. And if you're having problems with your screen closing, you can also read this section. I've never had problems, but I use a Mac, so maybe on Windows or Linux it's different. All right, so moving on. Yeah, so you can also do like we did with cout. With cin, you can do multiple variables on the same line, just using multiple extraction operators here. Good. And then what's this called again? I'm just quizzing you guys. This operator here, called the insertion operator. Extraction to the right, insertion to the left. Note if you do use the same line with multiple variables, you want to separate your input by white space. So that can be a space tab, a new line, just so it recognizes that it's the subsequent input. And again, this just says there's a debate over if you should initialize the variable immediately or if it just doesn't matter. For advanced readers, so this library, the INO library, the iostream library, does not provide a way to accept keyboard input without having the user having to press enter. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so moving on. Character in, cin, is also buffered, so keep that in mind. It's essentially the same. This is a neat insight to keep in mind if you're dealing with frame buffers, which are important for if you want to build your own, let's say, Vulkan render or whatever. There's this thing called first in, first out, or FIFO, and essentially, like we said, so it's the first in, first out. Also keep in mind that each line of input data in the input buffer is terminated by a new line character. Okay? All right. And this example here just shows the implications of cin or character in being a buffer. Yeah, note that in run 2, the program didn't wait for the user to enter additional input when extracting to variable y because there was already prior input in the input buffer that could be used. Okay, so what they essentially did in run 1 is they entered just one number here and one number here into the console. Whereas in run 2, they entered both of those numbers in here. So they entered one integer, and then they put a space, and then they put another integer, and then pressed enter. That means the buffer was already filled with two values. So this line was essentially skipped over and then printed. And here they go into more depth with the extraction process. First, the leading white space is discarded from the input buffer. So any tabs, new lines before the first character or number is just discarded. It doesn't put that into the buffer. If the input buffer is now empty, the extraction operator will wait for the user to enter more data. Leading white space is again discarded. The extraction operator then extracts as many consecutive characters as it can until it enters either a new line character or a character that is not valid. If any characters were extracted in step 3, extraction is a success. If no characters are extracted, it's a fail, and it will assign the object value of 0. Any non-abstracted characters, so if there was a fail for some reason and there were still characters, remain available for the next extraction attempt. They're just things to keep in mind. If none of that last part sticks with you, I think you'll do just fine. It's just good to kind of know the underlying mechanisms of how these objects work. And again, they just go over these insertion operators and extraction operators because people often mix them up. Just know that, just think of them as directional arrows of the flow of data. Yeah, so that's all I have for you guys. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'm Deco. Peace.